I would like to say that I stand unequivocally with Israel on the conflict with Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, ultimately. I'm a British male, and we have now constraints on free speech and various things. So this may go down as something that people find offensive, but the only people who would find it offensive would be people who don't think properly. There are many monstrosities that have happened around the world. And if people were really worried about genocide, then they might have looked to Syria, where mass genocide was happening at the same time. But they didn't. Everyone got fixed on Free Palestine, which then became pro-Hamas, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and it became a political thing. At the time, 980,000 people were being genocidally massacred in Syria, but no one cared about that. Nor did they care about the 50 million people enslaved in the world today, no. They got what I think is a great way to describe it. They got Gaza Floyd. Like the George Floyd moment, they were ready to riot. They just needed an enemy. And they found that enemy in Israel. I'm going to play you a clip in a second. And considering in my country, in the UK, 3,300 people have been arrested in the last year and detained and given sentences for things they post online. Yet this particular clip, people were not pursued, no attempt to arrest them or detain them or even question them was made. I'm going to show you the clip. It's pretty horrible speech. So we'll go on to that when I show it. So here it is.
Rule is 1,000 people charged after the August riots, many with long jail time sentences. Meanwhile, Mohammed Hassan, caught on CCTV beating 3 Asian women in Bradford, was given a 6-month suspended sentence in August. Two-tier rule is various convictions for social media posts, but these people driving around London in 2021 were never charged. Two-tier rule.
So that was taken in the UK, in London. Now, I understand the idea incitement to riot is not acceptable. Incitement to violence is not acceptable. But I've never heard even the idea of incitement to rape. And that's what was said by the people in the cars. Rape Zionists. Now, the term they use to define Zionists, it really does mean all Jews, or at least all Jews who believe Israel is a nation state, which is pretty much all Jews, and actually factually most of the world, or the free world at least. A slight history lesson for those who don't know it. It's not ironic that King David, the first king of the Jews, built Judea in the exact place Israel is now. And King Solomon went on to build Bethlehem in the exact place it is now. In total, that's all done 800 years before the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. So if I hear one more argument about it being an apartheid state, I will lose my mind, because how can it be an apartheid state? A lot of people on the left wing who are these protesters, they've been kind of conditioned through Marxist teachings and teachings of hate and how to hate through intersectional victimhood theory, which is part of Marxism, and it underpins the education of the young left, who are now becoming young adults who are completely confused, but ultimately want to side with something that's against the establishment and have decided that this is their big chance. Now, you notice that the less civilians who end up dying, the more they push that the war needs to end. If you actually, and the Palestinian people, it's a shame that people had to die, but they did die because they were taken by terrorists and strapped to them, in the large part. So let's blame the people who stole them and used them as human shields, hoping they wouldn't get blown up, rather than the people who have actually run the most economic war in terms of civilian casualties of an urban war in world history, but in terms of war. The casualty rate in Iraq was 8 civilians to 1 combatant. And in Afghanistan, it was just over 3 civilians to 1 combatant. The rate in Israel is 1.8 civilians per combatant, which means it's the least civilian casualties of any war, especially any urban war, but any war prior to it. And their most recent moves have been devastatingly effective, barely causing any civilian casualties. I actually watched a video of one of those pagers blow up in a terrorist. Terrorists lost their arm. But a man standing 2 feet from them was relatively unharmed. He had a mild concussion. So those were very specific bombs, and that's why lots of people didn't die from them. They just lost a limb or whatever. And the brilliant part of that was they had British support and Mossad support. And when people went to the hospitals missing an arm, they had to give their personal details and who was there to take charge of that. Well, I'm proud that the British intelligence was involved, but British intelligence was involved, but all hands off to Mossad, who have always been one of the world's top 5 intelligence agencies and combatant intelligence agencies. So they decimated Hezbollah and they've decimated Hamas. And still it goes on. The idea that Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal is insane. And anyone who backs it up, including my current Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who says that they would respect the ICC's rights to intervene and try him as a criminal. What for? Genocide? No. You have to prove intent. That's what genocide means. Intent to decimate an ethnic minority within either your country or outside of your country. Decimate. Not kill quite a lot by the fact that the other side is holding them as captives to shield themselves. That's the opposite. There is, nor has there ever been, a genocide. There is no genocide to talk about. And there's no apartheid, as I've explained it. You can't say that it's an apartheid when the 2 major places in Israel were built by Jewish kings. You might remember King David from slaying Goliath. Now, obviously that's open to interpretation. I imagine Goliath was a lot shorter and I imagine David was a lot taller. So it's really just a good shot with a rock. But he did, and he became the first king of the Jews, and King Solomon was part of that line, and a great part of that line. He built Bethlehem. You can't deny that. So you can't say it's an apartheid land. You can say that Muslims occupied it, that Muslims stole the land, if you want to do that. But on the left wing, you don't want to play that game, because you often talk, especially in America, they talk about how they're sitting on ancestral stolen lands of the Native Americans. So if you're talking about Gaza and you're talking, they're sitting on ancestral stolen lands of the Jewish people. Now, here's some facts that people don't like to admit. 75% of all of Palestinian men agree with what happened on October the 7th. Now here's a staggering one. 65% of those would do it themselves. This is not a non-militant populace. In the Palestinian, there's never been a Palestine, so forget the idea of free Palestine. I'm glad they have. They've just moved on to pro-Hamas. And the idiots, in America, they celebrated Veterans Day, and instead they turned it into Martyrs Day, where they celebrated the loss of all the terrorists' lives. But this is Israel fighting what should be actually a Western war against Iran, who's funded so much terrorism, so much hate, and is absolutely, they're losing their minds over Donald Trump becoming back in power because he crippled them once and he'll do it again. But there should be no more talk against Israel for what they've done. There should be nothing that Benjamin Netanyahu needs to answer for, because there's not one democratic Western country who would have acted in any way differently or taken more precautions. In fact, it's highly likely if that had happened, if it had been attacked from Mexico or Canada on the US, the civilian casualties would probably be about 10-1. Or let's say 8-1, or let's say 3-1. That's still less than 1.8-1, isn't it? So we're trying to hold Israel to a higher standard than we would hold any European or Western country. And that is unacceptable. And as soon as these people who are protesting everything from climate to free Palestine to pro-Hamas to whatever it is that's going on in their messed up heads, it is all a journey for them to realise how much they hate themselves and the world that they live in. Because that's what they're trying to change. They're trying to change the world without living in it first to see if they can change it from within, which has been the absolute rite of passage for 4,500 years of humanity. Humanity goes back further than that, but civilization doesn't. So leave it alone. Don't investigate or don't agree to an arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu. He was placed in an impossible position and he did a very good job. And now that job is really paying dividends. So I'm here to support Israel, absolutely. There has never been a Palestine, so you can't free it. There was once a Palestinia in the 3rd century, if you want to get technical, but that was in Syria. The Palestine people are known as Philistine in Arabic, which means they were always outcast nomad warriors. Now, that's not to say they don't deserve a home, but there's no way they can just pop back into Gaza at the end of the war. Israel have made that very clear, and Egypt have seen the need for that to be the case. And they've actually considered and are considering the idea that they will eventually take control of that part of the Middle East to de-radicalize the people in it, because it's that dangerous. So when you talk, if you're young and you're listening to this, have a think, do some research, find out what's going on, rather than just spill hatred out of your mouth, because it doesn't sound any better than it did the first day you did it. And I'll end on this, the first actual protest of Israeli forces in Gaza was on October the 7th in New York, before Israel had retaliated. So for some reason, the Western world's academic children were programmed to be anti-Semitic, because there's no way that on October the 6th there were no anti-Semitic views being expressed, but by October the 7th it was everywhere, and by October the 8th it was universal condemnation of Israelis. So I'm standing with Israel. I make no apology for that at all. And I don't believe, I'm very disappointed in Keir Starmer as a general leader. He's completely backtracked on all of his promises, but to say that he would respect the ICC's arrest warrant, it was a terrible move, because it's one, they're not really that important. They really don't have a role, and they don't have the right to arrest the leader or the current, head of a national state. Can't be done. Not without backup of every other nation around it, which they're not going to get, because it's not a genocide. It's actually a very, very calculated urban warfare campaign. So I'll leave it there. Think what you like. But if you think Israel have committed a genocide, I can tell you factually they haven't, in every way that you measure a genocide. So look it up. Or choose to be ignorant and support Hamas. Support people who like to kill children. That's fine. Not fine by me, but if that's going to be your point of view, that's the cultural accepted norm. But actually Israel have done far more, and far more to save Gazan lives than the Hamas would have done, or could have done, and ever have. They've used their civilian population. They've abused their civilian population. and Iran have abused the civilian population for 20 years. So, who's the enemy, Iran or Israel? I'll leave it there. You be lucky, I'll be good.